Unit 11, Week 11, Module 11, Emotional Behavioral Disorders. Today we're going to talk a lot about SEL, Social Emotional Learning. And this will be the last lecture for this module, just 2 this time. Okay, so as promised, we're going to have a bit of an overview of SEL. Social Emotional Learning. Here's a quote sort of explaining it. SEL is the process through which individuals acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, it's a big one, and make responsible decisions. Okay, so this quote just covered all of the 5 different competencies of SEL. So we're going to break down each of those today. You don't have to just memorize them from this quote. And there's also a video that you can watch. We're not going to watch it during the lecture, but provided a link to it in today's PDF. So you can watch that if you'd like to. All right. So who sort of is the originator of SEL? It's an organization called CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So collaborative for ASEL, right? You could remember it that way. It's an interdisciplinary network, meaning people from all different professions work in this, of collaborators working together nationwide. And their mission statement is along the line, goes like this: to help make evidence-based SEL an integral part of education from preschool through high school. Here's a link to their website. If you take a look at your district's website, any district that you plan on working in, you can always do a search for SEL on their website and see how invested that district is in SEL. In my home district, we are very invested in SEL. There are trainings every week. And in my district where my wife works, it's the same story, SEL all day long. So it's a part of education. No one's going to expect you to be an expert on it, or me to be an expert on it either. But it is, it's there. It's there. You will probably encounter it. Okay, so there are 2 things that are important about SEL. First, there's the competencies, the things that we're trying to teach, the tools that we're trying to give the school children, and there's the context in which we do that. So here's the quote from CASEL: just as important as the SEL competencies are the contexts for teaching them, the overall educational environment. SEL is not a single program or teaching method. It involves coordinated strategies across classrooms, schools, homes, and communities and districts. Okay, so we're trying to paint a picture. This image here, this diagram, is trying to illustrate the distributed nature of SEL. It sort of only works when the whole organization is involved, like the whole agency, the whole district, this kind of thing. Okay, and again, these 5 competencies that we see here, we're going to break down in more detail. Okay, on this slide we have a link to the video that I referred to earlier. These are the 5 competencies, the 5 SEL core competencies. Remember, these are, we call them competencies because they are things that people learn to employ in their lives to be successful in a number of ways. Turn on my other light here. Okay. And here they are: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Let's talk about the first one, self-awareness. This can be defined under, CASEL's definition as the ability to recognize one's emotions and thoughts and the influence of emotions and thoughts on behavior. Okay, so the second part about the influence of emotions and thoughts on behavior, is where we catch ourselves and say, hey, I'm talking to this person in a very impatient and rude way right now. Is it because I haven't had my lunch yet? Right? Something like that, where we can check ourselves and examine our own emotions and what effect they might have. In a classroom setting, I have talked before in this course about the affective filter, which is a sort of screening device that we have that is sort of produced by our emotions. So you might walk into a classroom one day with an attitude that's like, if you're a student, with an attitude that's something like, I don't want to be here, this is boring, or it's too hard, I don't understand, whatever. That will really affect how you interact with the lessons that day, how you interact with your educators that day. So self-awareness skills include identifying emotions, cultivating accurate self-perception, identifying our strengths and our limitations, right? If someone's in a very negative mood, they might say, I'm not good at anything. And the opposite is also not a good place to be. I'm good at everything, right? Nobody's good at everything. We all have our strengths and limitations. But the competencies, such as, okay, we're talking about self-awareness right now. It goes some distance towards building self-confidence and self-efficacy. Second competency, self-management. The ability to regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. Okay, so we go from self-awareness, we recognize our emotions, the effects they have on our behavior, and go to self-management. How are we going to regulate these emotions? Yeah. Self-management skills include controlling impulses. I see my 1-year-old walking around the house yesterday, just just anything he wants to do, he just does. Right? There's no control of impulses. He figured out how to open the sliding glass door, so now we have to lock it all the time, because if we don't, he just opens it and just walks out into nature. Right? No impulse control. Managing stress. We're all under stress, and sometimes maybe we can forget that kids are under stress too. If you think back to your school days, you can probably identify some places where you had a hard time. Setting and achieving goals. This is another bit of structure, and we keep talking about structure and how it's a positive thing in an educational context. And motivating oneself. So if we're teaching people tools that they can use, we're kind of scaffolding them. And we've talked about scaffolding before. And in this context, scaffolding is about helping someone develop the ability to start by themselves, to begin doing a hard task by themselves. So that's what motivating oneself is about. All right, the third competency is social awareness. This can be defined as the ability to take the perspective of and empathize with others. Sometimes when we're older, like when we're adults, and we're not as socially aware as we could be, sometimes people take what's called empathy training. So definitely best to start when we're younger than that. Social awareness skills include understanding others' perspective, right? Trying to see it through see a situation or a problem or whatever through someone else's eyes. Having empathy, which is understanding other people's feelings, even if you don't share them. Appreciating diversity is another one. Social awareness skills. Understand that all kinds of diversity, socioeconomic, racial, everything, anything you could think of. Recognizing that exists and that other people might not have the same perspective that you do, which goes some way towards respecting others. Okay, so when we have and practice empathy, we think about other people's perspectives, we bring diversity in, it helps us to respect others. Competency number 4, relationship skills. Remember, we have talked about the challenges that some children face in developing and maintaining satisfactory relationships. Relationship skills include the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships. Some relationship skills include communicating clearly. I think all of us can identify with this. You know, in a marriage, for instance, it's crucial to communicate clearly, to be able to listen, you know, listening, cooperating, negotiating conflict constructively. Boy, that's a challenge for some grown-ups. Guilty. And seeking and offering help. Okay, let's go back to negotiating conflict constructively for a moment. You know, there are different ways that we can deal with conflict. And if we remember a few modules ago, we were talking about de-escalation. When conflicts come up, you know, the temptation sometimes is to escalate, especially if the other person starts yelling, right? You might want to yell. Imagine yourself being a young school child, and your friend is yelling at you. Well, you want to yell right back, right? But if you can sort of de-escalate that through different methods, there are a few examples in the video that I linked to today. This would be much more positive. Okay, the final competency, responsible decision making. Defined here as the ability to make constructive and respectful choices about personal behavior and social interactions. These skills include identifying and effectively solving problems, evaluating consequences, reflecting, recognizing ethical standards and social norms. Okay, so there's a reason that this is competency number 5 and not competency number 1. It builds upon all the other competencies that we've talked about. Evaluating consequences, you know, that's a very meta cognitive thing to be doing, because we can think about, we've talked several times in this course about positive consequences, negative consequences, right? We want to steer ourselves and others towards positive consequences. Recognizing ethical standards and social norms, like when we sort of come to an understanding that people around us operate based on these kinds of things, we can accept or reject them, right? And in a school setting, rejecting them means a lot of trouble for you, probably a lot of time in the principal's office, but at the very least, it's going to make your educational experience much more challenging. So if we can help folks to recognize ethical standards, social norms, it goes a long way. Okay. In this part of the lecture, we're going to talk about developmental trauma. We're done with SEL for the moment. We use this term to describe a variety of traumatic events that a child may experience, as the name suggests. People also call this adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. That sounds a little, you know, ACEs, it sounds a little positive. So I think the more popular term is developmental trauma. A lot of the time, the child's parent or caregiver is unable to reduce the stress that the child endures, or they might be the source of the stress themselves. These children are still at risk of developing significant and complex symptoms of developmental trauma. So let's take a look at what sorts of things go into this. We've talked before about how children who have access to good healthcare, housing, and stable parental units have a better chance. And this sort of tree and roots diagram, you know, lists a lot of the things that we've been talking about. Let's recall that in the previous lecture, we noted some statistics that said that children with EBDs, and now we're learning that also children with childhood trauma are incarcerated more than others as adults. So anything we can do to mitigate that, is great. We want them in this system, not that system. When you have, a situation where there's a school on this block, and then 10 blocks away, there's a jail, it becomes very real, right? It becomes very real for you. We want you to stay here. We're going to support you. We don't want you to go over there, right? Okay, what are consequences of developmental trauma? I know my cartoon student looks very happy here. Hey, maybe she's having a good day, okay? There are some consequences to cognitive development. We've talked about cognitive development a number of times in this course. They can have trouble concentrating. They might have learning difficulties or slower processing speed. It takes longer to process something. They may have impaired problem solving and executive function deficits. We've talked about executive functioning in terms of a lot of exceptionalities, but not in terms of a survivor of trauma, right, or a sufferer of trauma. What about their social development? They may have attachment problems, difficulties relating to others, isolation, bullying, either receiving or giving, misreading social cues, and poor boundaries. So these folks are just absolutely made for SEL. An SEL team could help someone living with these experiences immensely. What else? Physical health, body and brain. They may have various health conditions, problems with immune and stress systems and sensory issues. When we're under a lot of stress, our bodies produce one type of chemical, we may have too much of that. Psychological consequences include dissociation, psychotic-like symptoms, and comorbid diagnoses. So we've mentioned that a number of the exceptionalities we talk about are comorbid. They have high comorbidity. They occur in parallel with other challenges. So developmental trauma is among these. What about the development in terms of emotional and behavioral? It's dysregulated. Children might have intense or blunted affect. Remember that affect is emotion. They can have difficulties coping with stress or limited ability to communicate feelings. Going back to the first and second competency of SEL. They may have low frustration tolerance. So that's, a tendency to sort of give up more quickly than others might. May have low self-worth, thinking, I'm not good at anything. They can be easily triggered and aggressive as well. Okay, so those are some ramifications for emotional and behavioral development when someone has developmental trauma. Okay, what can we do? Let's pay close attention here. What can we do if we have concerns about a child? We can talk to the child's parents, caregivers. I bet you thought of that already. And if we're a paraeducator, it's the classroom teacher that's going to be talking to them. But the teacher relies on us to give them the data that back this up, right? The observable, measurable phenomena that we've been recording, because the teacher can't record it, right? They rely on us to do that. Do a screening if the school has the means to do so. There's an ages and stages questionnaire that a lot of schools use. It's possible to screen for developmental trauma. You can also share resources with the family, let them know that this is available to help, that's available to help. Different districts and different counties have different services that are free or low cost. And we might think about some other ways that we can express our concerns. But I think primarily, we want to talk to the student as much as possible, support them as much as possible, and talk to our classroom teacher about it. Okay, This is one resource that's out there for educators. It's the Child Trauma Toolkit, which provides school administrators, teachers, staff, and concerned parents with basic information about working with traumatized children in the school system. So if you want a broad overview of this tool, you can go check this PDF out online. All right. The next time we meet, we should have some mock interviews set up or not. We'll find out. Okay, we've come to the end of week 11, day 2. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you on the next one.